Shabbat Shalom, everybody. It's so nice to be together. Growing up as I did in the 60s, one of my favorite songs, as is my wife's, is The Sound of Silence by Simon and Garfunkel. And that song was actually written as a protest, as a critique of American society at a remarkably turbulent time after the assassination of JFK, the war in Vietnam, the civil rights movement. It's the song that spoke of the political unrest of the day, but also the emotional disconnect in human relationships. Although Paul Simon was in his early 20s when that song was released, The Sound of Silence spoke to an entire generation. And now, all these years later, it still is relevant. More than 50 years later, the song speaks, the lyrics talk to our time. In the naked light I saw 10,000 people, maybe more. People talking without speaking, people hearing without listening. People writing songs that voices never share, and no one dared disturb the sound of silence. Fools, said I, you do not know. Silence is like a cancer grows. Hear my words that I might teach you. Take my arms that I might reach you. But my words, like silent raindrops, fell and echoed in the wells of silence. A generation later, we find ourselves continuing to ignore the sounds of silence. Pundits and media experts who talk without saying anything. Each of us in our own political echo chambers, silencing the voices of others. A world too indifferent to the warnings of disaster, and a society in which people are much more likely to pay attention to what's going on their cell phones than the person next door. So the question that I want to ask this morning is, does silence have a place in our world? Are there times when silence is the best policy? Are there moments when silence is golden? In our Torah portion this morning, as our B'nai Mitzvah pointed out, we learn about Aaron's silence, the brother of Moses, whose sons were killed by God on the 8th day of the dedication of the tabernacle. Nadav and Avihu are suddenly taken from Aaron, and Aaron is silent. Moses, his brother, though, is quick to say, this is what the Lord meant when he said, those near me I show myself holy and gain glory before all the people. Should Moses have kept silent? Should Aaron have spoken? How many of us have found ourselves in the same position like Moses? If you ever listen to conversations in a Shiva house, in a Jewish house of condolence, you know that well-wishers sometimes stand by and say perfectly inappropriate things like, I don't know what to say. It's just terrible. Or they may better be in a better place now. Or at least they're not suffering. And worst of all, you have to be strong for your family. Those words are often better unspoken than spoken. You know what our tradition teaches us we're supposed to do in a house of mourning? It teaches us to be silent. We are actually instructed to sit next to the mourner and say nothing. And if the mourner wants to speak to you, then you are to respond. And if not, you simply say, "May God comfort you," and leave them. And how many of us have found ourselves in the place of Aaron? We've suffered a terrible loss, or we are dealing with terrible news. We want to yell and we want to scream. We want to cry out. We want to accuse God, maybe even deny God. We're so filled with emotion, however, but we can't speak. How can anyone understand what we are going through in this moment? Again, our tradition offers us a very different response. We recite the Kaddish, a praise of God, to be offered as a prayer, maybe as something to provoke a response within us to God, to challenge God, to express our pain to God. At a Shiva house, we're given a forum to say that that's not okay. As mourners, we're invited to experience our loss, whether in silence, in tears, or in words. From the perspective of Jewish law, our Torah reading has it backwards. Moses speaks, Aaron is silent. Rather, it's Aaron who should have spoke. It's Aaron who should have raised his voice. And Moses should have been silent before him. We should never be silent in the face of our sorrow. While we do not try to explain our suffering, we are instructed, encouraged to give expression to our sorrow. And I think about Aaron, and I think about Moses, and I think about that struggle in terms of the Holocaust, the Shoah. That scene of Aaron's sons, Nadav and Avihu, lying incinerated in the holy place of God, is an appropriate image to use when we think about the destruction of 1/3 of our people. 6 million men, women, children, 101.5 million children. And the response of the Jewish people after the Shoah is also reflective of Aaron and Moses. Survivors often didn't want to talk about the war, didn't want to talk about what had happened to them. And their friends and relatives in America often didn't want to hear what they had to say. Rather, we told them, let's not talk about it, let's make a life. Put all of your efforts, put all of your anger, take all of your emotion, and put it to use to making a new life for yourself. And this is reflected by how little was written about the Holocaust after the war. For more than a decade, almost nothing was written. But it was the Eichmann trial in 1961 that changed all that. The fact that the architect of the Holocaust was on trial in the state of Israel, the Jewish homeland, in such a public way, entered the Vayidom, ended the sense of silence of the Jewish people in a way that's hard to describe. We no longer imitated Aaron, but we imitated Moses. We began to talk, we began to share, we began to allow our feelings to come to the fore. Perhaps it was hearing a man who had the blood of 6 million people on his hands say he was just a cog in a great machine. He was just following orders that broke the silence. But from that time forward, there has been a torrent of books on the subject of the Holocaust. Every detail has been documented in books and in film. The Jews of the United States have created a National Holocaust Museum in Washington, D.C., across from the Jefferson Memorial, and more than 1 million people walk through that museum a year, acknowledging America's failures to do more to end the suffering. The world's failing has also been addressed in Holocaust studies in high schools across the country. In many states, the Holocaust is a required subject for high school students. And the creator of one of the most impactful curricula on the subject, Facing History and Ourselves, Margaret Stern Strom, died recently. No, Aaron has broken his silence. 62 years since the Eichmann trial, we might also ask what impact this has had. A study was done regarding high school programs by Mid-Atlantic University. And the study provides strong evidence that a result of knowledge of the Holocaust is much higher than it has previously been. In addition, there's been a positive impact of Holocaust education on student attitudes regarding diversity and tolerance in the face of hate. These attributes are sustained over time as students transition into young adulthood. It's also promising to see the effects of Holocaust education are amplified by the use of survivor testimony in the classroom. That said, anti-Semitism on the internet has grown exponentially. Holocaust denial has been given a loud megaphone and continues to grow throughout the world, along with the obscene references to the camps and the wish that Hitler had finished the job. Last week, a group of Jewish parents wrote a letter to the city council in the town of Belchertown, Massachusetts, near Springfield, reporting that dozens of students at a Massachusetts middle school are accused of harassing their Jewish peers, including performing Nazi salutes in the school and making references to the gas chambers and the Holocaust. School officials lamented that it is difficult to teach tolerance when the same Holocaust denial is being trumpeted by well-known singers and media influencers. Such is our situation as we approach Yom HaShoah, Holocaust Remembrance Day, this Monday evening. Not for a moment am I advocating giving up or lowering our voices or, God forbid, sitting in silence. What I would advocate is doing so strategically, using every method available, including commercials on television, which are beginning to be seen, to pay attention to anti-Semitism, and that the danger of hate is as powerful today as it was when the Third Reich rose to power. That those who were murdered were people just like you and I, people with powerful souls and spirits. That an entire civilization was destroyed, along with men, women, and children who died. This year at Anshe Emet, we are adding a new voice to this call to Zachor, to remember. We're adding the voice of the violin. On Monday night, the beginning of Yom HaShoah, we will have a powerful commemoration of the Holocaust. Thanks to the good efforts of our men's club and the JCC of Chicago, we're going to hear the voices of violins that were saved from the Holocaust playing music written during that dark period. Some say that the violin is an instrument that most resembles the human voice. This year, we are allowing the music played on these violins of hope to carry the message of pain, of outrage, and the sadness for what was lost. In other words, these violins are speaking when so many voices were silenced. The violins have been collected and repaired over the years by a father and son, Amnon and Avshalom Weinstein. The collection began when members of the Israeli Philharmonic wanted to rid themselves of their German-made violins after the war. It was too painful an experience for these musicians to make beautiful music on instruments made in a place that created the destruction of European Jewry. So the Weinsteins took them and then expanded, taking possessions of violins saved after the war. Some have been thrown from cattle cars en route to Auschwitz. Some came from survivors who held on to them. Others from relatives and friends who had these instruments passed down to them. Some have the Star of David carved on the back or inside the instrument. These Jewish-looking instruments were popular before the war for those who played at weddings and bar mitzvahs, klezmer groups. These are the instruments that Amnon and Avshalom have collected and repaired over the years, and some of these instruments will be played here on Monday night. As they tell it, the Nazis used music and especially violins to humiliate and degrade Jews in ghettos and camps. They confiscated many thousands instruments of Jews all over Europe. Our concerts are the ultimate answer to their plan to annihilate a people and their culture, to destroy human lives and freedom. The sounds of the violin is often compared to the beauty of the human voice, and when played with talent and spirit is known to reach and touch our hearts. This was the role of the violin in the war, to touch hearts, kindle hope for better times, and spread it around. Wherever there was music, there was hope. Our violins present the victory of the human spirit over evil and hatred. As many as 6 million Jews were murdered in World War II, but their memory is not forgotten. It comes back to life with every concert and every act of love and celebration of the human spirit. As Yom HaShoah approaches, I ask you to remember the inspired words of a young poet in the 1960s, Paul Simon. In the naked light I saw 10,000 people, maybe more, people talking without speaking, people hearing without listening, people writing songs that voices never share, and no one dared disturb the sounds of silence. Please join us on Monday night as we challenge those sounds of silence, either in person or online, as we break the sounds of silence by allowing the voices of violins to fill this sanctuary. The music of those holy instruments, written during those dark years, will allow us to pay tribute to the memory of the 6 million, as well as the hope that the world may yet learn the lessons of the reality and abject evil of the Holocaust, to ensure that the words never again are truly heard and never silenced. It is Aaron's night to speak. Shabbat Shalom.